Good evening and welcome to another Cleveland Public Library, the next 400 digital discussion. As always, Chris Tanaka from 19 News, your moderator and host. June is Pride Month, and tonight we are examining the intersection of race and sexuality. I couldn't be happier to introduce our two guests tonight. Jasmine Burnett, an author, feminist. She owns a consulting firm and specializes in reproductive justice, among other things. Avery Ware is an educator, writer, advocate, also an adjunct professor at Notre Dame College. Good evening to both of you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Chris.
You know, I was sitting back and wondering where the entry point of this conversation would be. And I thought back a year ago today. We were 15 days removed from the murder of George Floyd. The country was in tumult. And the vast majority of protest and coverage of it was strictly along racial lines. I look this year and I see far more celebratory images and when it comes to Pride, more positive visibility. How would you describe Pride 2021 as it has started compared to maybe a year ago? Where are we at now? Jasmine, dive in.
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, we were in a very different place last year, as you said, Chris. And I think that being hunkered down and being forced to be in our homes, it has really made it a cause for celebration that people can actually leave their homes and safely celebrate Pride. It is really important to the LGBTQ IA plus community. And I think that, you know, Pride is with you no matter where you are. There were a lot of virtual Prides that happened last year. So Pride didn't stop because the pandemic was here. And I know that people live very proudly in their lives every day because existing and surviving this world and surviving many of the conditions that we walked through as a country and Black folks as a people over the years and last year definitely gives us cause to celebrate and gives us something to reflect on. And I'm curious about what Avery has to say about their reflections on Pride from last year and this year.
Yeah, so last year was a very interesting Pride, and for lack of a better term, I actually kind of prefer where we were last year, only for the very real reason that people were acknowledging the very harmful ways, and acknowledging the intersectionality of police violence against Black folks and, you know, the fight for queer liberation. For Pride, right? So everybody was talking, not everybody, but a lot of people were making that connection, which if you were social justice minded or doing liberation work is necessary to do, right? This year, like Jasmine said, is a much more celebratory Pride because we've been in the house for so long. And right now we kind of got the signal like it's so kind of safe to, you know, gather in groups. So now it's a much more, I'm free, let's kick it. But and not to say that no one is really doing that analytical work that's necessary, but last year, because we were dealing with continuous protests in the month of June, a lot of people were drawing those connections between police brutality, queer liberation, and for the very fact that the reason why we have a Pride is because of police brutality, right? So when you draw the connection, we can have some real serious conversations about liberation work.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, before we go any further, you'll see pronouns: Avery, he, they; Jasmine, she, her; and myself, he, him. Is it okay then, Avery, that this year is more celebratory? Is this a kind of a swinging of the pendulum? Is it okay?
Yeah, no, it's completely fine. If you saw me at Cleveland Pride last weekend, I was out there kicking it with everybody else. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, and like we all contain multitudes. And the joy and the celebration, that's resistance too, right? So it's definitely okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, Avery. And I think that what we've learned over the course of this year is that celebration and grief go hand in hand. They typically
Absolutely.
happen at the same time, and we have
Mhm.
to navigate them at the same time. Our country has taken a crash course in what it means to both celebrate at the same time as you're grieving. And so I
Right.
think that when we think about Pride and we think about all of the movements that it did, the Pride was launched from police brutality, that we have, concerns with HIV/AIDS and all of these other healthcare, public health, social issues that we still are holding in the LGBTQ plus community. Yes, we can talk about all of the steps forward we've made, and then, where we still have growth. And I think that when we talk about who is responsible for that growth, we have to be very careful, because LGBTQ plus people did not create the conditions where people do not embrace, see, and hold us as human or sacred, as beings on this earth, and contributors to our families and our communities. And when I think about what you just said, Avery, about intersectionality and how people are drawing the intersections between issues, we're talking about the intersection of being both Black and LGBTQ. And so when I think about intersectionality, for those who aren't familiar with intersectionality, it was a framework that was introduced by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and it was really centered on her essay, From Margin to Center. So who exists at the margins, and how do we center who's missing and what they need from the conversations that are critical, important, and economic, political, and social avenues. We cannot leave people out, and that's what intersectionality does. Intersectionality also teaches people how to see us as humane, because it is a theory, a framework, and a practice. It's something that we learn, it's a framework that we buy into, and it's a practice that grounds us in our interactions every day. So I think, Pride, again, is 365. The celebration is this opportunity, Chris. The celebration is talking about our lives as whole beings and not just parts of who we are, because we don't live single issue lives. We live full, whole lives.
Yeah, I love what you just said. We don't live single issue lives. I had a friend many years ago who said to me one time, and I was in my early 20s, we were hanging out, and he said, look, I was born, this was his words, I still remember this day, I was born with 2 strikes against me. I'm Black and I'm gay in America. And Avery and I had a conversation where we were talking about intersectionality. And after we had that talk, this is when this conversation popped back into my head. Explain intersectionality. Explain how your race and sexuality are intertwined, interlocked, and really can't be undone. Please.
Right. Yeah, Jasmine just did a wonderful job of explaining it. I love that Audre Lorde quote, "We don't live single issue lives," right? Because we don't. So for an example,
a day-to-day basis, take me through your day. Maybe not philosophically, but what do you face? What do you encounter?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we going there. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a story. So I was headed to a friend's house. We're actually going to watch the finale of Drag Race, and they needed ice and like some paper plates. So I stopped into like a local gas station in Warrensville Heights, and I don't remember exactly what I was wearing, but I think I had like big hoops in, and maybe like a heeled boot or something like that. And as I was walking in, I could like see the whispers and people like, oh, and somebody actually said to their friend, it was like, what is that? And I just turned around and I was like, thank you. Because to me, that's a compliment, right? But me being in this body, I am a person of particular size and build, but I also present a little more feminine sometimes. So it's not only I'm Black and I'm gay, but I am Black of a particular size and build, and I'm queer in my person and in my presentation. So a lot of that can close a lot of doors for me. It has closed a lot of doors for me. Even the ones that are open and I walk through, I still face a lot of obstacles that I wouldn't if I presented a little bit differently, right? But I would not change it for the world, right? I think another example of intersectionality that is not solely about me, but I was reading this study earlier this week, and it said that 50% of Black queer students don't feel safe at school, right? Like none of them feel safe, like they have a place where they can go and they're safe, right? And that is a race issue, right? But it's also a gender and sexuality issue, right? The two work together to say that, you know, as a Black queer student specifically, I don't feel safe here, right? So it's a multi-layered, you know, framework. It's a multi-level experience to hold different identities. And I think that's a big misconception about intersectionality, that people just kind of like pile on identities, like I'm Black and I'm gay and I'm fat and I'm disabled, right? And all that is cool, but it's not about the identities. It's about how different systems work in conjunction to, I don't know, exacerbate discrimination, to exacerbate privilege or to lessen privilege, right? So it's not solely about identities, it's how those identities work within systems and how they affect people and communities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Jasmine?
Yes, when I think about intersectionality, particularly as Avery just shared, you know, I am a woman who identifies as a woman and also presents very feminine. So when I am received in the world, I am received as a feminine woman and most times a heterosexual woman, which I am not. And so, you know, for me, there is some privilege in that for folks who are non-binary and queer and trans. There's some privilege that I hold in the community around that I acknowledge and understand. At the same time, I am still a Black woman who deals with gender discrimination, racism. I am a smaller framed Black woman, so I'm perceived to be a bit more timid, and I'm not. So I think that, you know, there are a lot of perceptions that people make just by looking at you and based on what their idea of you is. And so, you know, the work becomes, how can society, how can platforms like this media platform you have work to educate people about that we are whole humans. And just because you see Avery with a beard does not mean that they are not femme. And just because you see someone who is, you know, who you may perceive as a different gender and they are a trans person, that doesn't mean that they are not that gender that they are presenting in their body and are comfortable in their body with. So I think more than it is on LGBTQ AI plus people to communicate that to society, you know, and teach, you know, it's like society should become more curious instead of, you know, I feel like there's more kind of pointing at and, you know, so much, you know, saying that it's wrong. And we've dealt with this for years and years and years. And, you know, and Black folks honestly know how to navigate being discriminated against based on our skin. You know, and even in the Black community, colorism is an issue. Someone who is fairer skinned may get preferential treatment than someone who is darker skinned. So, you know, that doesn't mean that we're just altogether wrong. That means that we hold complexity as human beings. And I am hopeful that our society is moving toward a more interdependent and complicated society that considers everyone's presence as valued.
Yeah, it seems like there is a quality where you want curiosity, you want people to ask questions, but at the same point, you know, to me, acceptance just comes with, hey, we're all just, you know, we're all okay, right? We're just conversing here. We're just three human beings on the planet Earth. Where's the role of curiosity? Where's the role of how much should straight people know about the LGBTQ plus community and the sub communities therein?
Yeah, I think the thing about that is you don't have to know everything. You will never know everything. I'm in the community and I don't know everything, right? But at the base level, it's about respecting the humanity of all people,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you don't have to know the ins and outs of everyone's identity and what terms to use. But if you are interested, there's lots of scholarship. There's this site, I don't know if you heard of it, called Google, and they answer all the questions you have. So if you really are curious, you can type in whatever you need and Google has the answer. And that's another thing. The one or two queer people in your life, the one or two Black people in your life or brown people in your life are not your instructors. They're not your therapists. They're not your priests or your pastors. You can't take all your burdens to them and expect them to teach you and educate you on everything, especially if you ain't paying. That is exhausting, that is laborious, and that is even more stigmatizing than you may think it is.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't have to know the ins and outs of everything, but you have to know that there are a range of people. Like, we can't even think of human. We can't even think as humans about the different amount of people in the world. But what you have to know is that there is a bunch of people, and they all deserve respect for their humanity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And start with the request, with the respect, and that's your entry point into the curiosity, into asking questions, in laying bare your own shortcomings and your own naivete. And I'll be the first person to raise my hand. I had a list of questions a mile long for Avery when we were able to connect beforehand, because I wanted to be respectful, and I didn't want my own naivete to show, because I don't want to seem inadequate for this conversation.
Yeah, but I think that's another misconception, is that it's not inadequacy, but I don't know, just kind of being vulnerable and like not being afraid to make mistakes, because we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. Like, even sometimes I mess up people's pronouns when I use he, they, right? So I don't think it's about making mistakes, but it is the kind of urgency you have to learn from those, and then moving forward, conducting yourself in a better, not better, but a more inclusive and equitable kind of mentality, right? Because again, we're human. We're all going to mess up. It's about what we do with that mess up and how we apply what we've learned moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's also about.
Go ahead, please.
Just real quick.
Please, go ahead.
I just think too that people assume that they don't have LGBTQ plus people in their families. So your work starts at home. It starts with your family. It starts with asking folks and being curious about your family members who don't come to family events, who are very quiet when they attend, who never bring a partner or a spouse with them. It's about getting curious and being supportive and respectful and loving to the people who you have the closest access to see what's going on with them and what they might need in your family dynamic. There are many people who are closeted in their families because they are treated very, harmfully in their families. So I think that, people think they have to go outside looking for this information. The movement and the revolution always starts at home. So start with yourself, start with your family, and see what you discover, and being curious and respectful.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. There's a legislative war going on right now. Well, I say right now, but you could say over the last, X decades since the union of this country. Where are we at right now with this legislative war, specifically on trans rights? And the apparent fear mongering that athletics will be demonized, and my gosh, bathrooms have a sanctity. Where are we at, Jasmine?
Well, I mean, just think about growing up in a household where you have multiple genders using the same bathroom. It's the same thing that's going to happen when we are all able to use public bathrooms. I mean, people act like they act as if there is something so drastically different that we've never experienced in our homes, and all of the boogie people are going to come out, like the boogie man and the boogie women and the boogie folks. That is not it. I think it's very funny that, and you have to laugh sometimes to keep from crying, and you have to make light of it, because what else can you do, and how else can you convince people of your humanity? I'm not quite sure. So yes, the legislative battles are just society's lack of desire and willingness to see people as human. And so then we have to go through these legislative battles to actually protect our humanity and defend our rights, because many things have happened that led to that case, right? People have, testified on so many human rights violations. And then, I do a lot of work in reproductive justice. And what that means is, one thing that we know is that Black trans women, their life expectancy is 35 years old, which is ridiculous because that was the same life expectancy of Black women at the height of slavery. So we have to see these connections, and we have to make those connections as we are expanding the spectrum of femininity of women. And I think that when we think about these legislative battles, it is just really, you've legislated the laws against us. Now we're trying to legislate the laws to protect us. And so it also shows us that the flag has limitations, both the pride flag and the American flag, if you exist inside of a body of intersections that are not white, male, cisgender. Avery, I'm curious about what you think.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this because it is frustrating and is really contradictory to the narrative of America regarding children. It's always, what about the children? Two men want to hold hands on TV. What about the kids? Disney can't even touch on anything that's not cisgender or heterosexual. Or it's, what about the kids? But then you're passing or proposing to introduce all this legislation that is harmful to our kids, right? If you look at a lot of this legislation that has been passed or is on the desk of governors to be signed or has been introduced in state by state, the vast majority of them target children, trans children specifically. Restrooms, sport, documentation, healthcare, a lot of that is specific to trans youth, right? And it's a double-edged sword, right? So not only are you actively discriminating against children, literal children, right? But you are now showing cis kids or the cisgender and heterosexual kids how to treat people that are othered, right? You are giving them literal instructions on how to other somebody else, right? The narrative that they hear is that this person is different, so I now have a pass to be rude to them, to bully them, to discriminate against them however way I see fit, right? It is a literal indoctrination of, continuing oppressive ideologies and behaviors, right? That scripture that's popular says, train up a child in the way you should go. That's not only like biblical text, that is political instruction, right? When you say to kids that this person is different, so we have a right to discriminate against them interpersonally and legally and systematically and structurally, not only are you harming these kids, but you are instructing other kids how to treat and other different people, right? And it's really contradictory because even during the culture wars of the late 70s, all the organizations that were popping up that were anti-queer and anti-LGBT were centered around children. There was one literally called Save Our Children, right? But here you have real legislation that is harming in real ways our children. And even when they are harmed, they can't seek health care because a lot of these bills say you don't have to provide care for them or you don't have to provide adequate care for them. It's like really frustrating and contradictory, but I think that is an American theme, is contradiction, because it says one thing out the left side of their mouth, but in action, it does something completely different.
Yeah, really well spoken. You mentioned the culture wars. When we talk about legislation, obviously there are processes that a bill will go through, and there's steps along the way to intervene. When we talk about curiosity and acceptance at home, that begins with parents teaching their kids. When we talk, as you mentioned, Avery, about culture wars, what's the remedy there in American pop culture stream of consciousness to kind of battle or blunt or repel those anti-gay culture wars?
Yeah, one, I think we have to start with the language, right? The word war, it's a lot of W's, got me tongue-tied. War suggests that there are two sides of equal power and privilege fighting against each other, right? So one can win, right? That's not what's happening here. You have oppressed and marginalized and powerless groups that need actual rights, that need resources, that need their material conditions met. And then you have the other side that has power, that has privilege, that is actively withholding the things that another group needs, right? So first we have to get the language together, because war and battle doesn't accurately address what is really happening. And if we get the language right, and if we get the language right, then maybe some people can switch it in their mind, like, no, this isn't, two communities or two, groups of people of equal power and privilege fighting for the same thing. Is actually the quite opposite, right? One has all the resources and the other has little to none.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for that. And then Jasmine, continue.
Yes, I think that I really appreciate what Avery shared about the word war and the definition of that, particularly because, people who are not in support of or are somehow repulsed by LGBTQ, equality, rights, any of those things, they see us as enemies. They see us as the enemy, and we do not see them as enemies. We see them as people who may be our neighbors and people who we may work with. And I think that, our context as people who have been in these really challenging circumstances that were not due to our own doing. If we look at the, kind of a white supremacist patriarchal culture where, the comparison is what does this white cisgender man have and why don't you have those things? That's actually not how I look at things. I feel that we are so wealthy in our community because we've been able to survive such brutality. And I am really challenged by the idea of resilience. And when people say, oh my goodness, you live at the cross section of so many intersections, you are so strong. Well, that's because survival is not an option.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's really strange and peculiar to me when people say that, they're really amazed by the fact that we're surviving. What else are we supposed to do? We too want to live full, healthy, and whole lives. And to what degree are you a barrier to that is actually the question that people should ask themselves. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. Just move out of my way and don't become a barrier to me.
Right. If you can't help, don't hurt.
That's right.
We do have a question from Facebook that I'd like to read and each of you to answer. It says, thanks for offering this. I'd like the presenters to share their thoughts on actions other queer folks of color can engage in to show solidarity and support.
So the question is, how can queer people of color support?
Engage in and show solidarity and support.
Good question. So the first thing I would say is identify where you have some privilege, identify where you have some power, and then use that to provide resources to someone who may not. Right. So me, I am queer, but I'm read as male a lot of the time, and that comes with a certain amount of privileges. Right. That comes with me having access to maybe some spaces that say maybe a Black trans woman would not. Right. So then now it is my duty to see how can I help, how can I advocate. Sometimes that is speaking their name in rooms that's not in. Sometimes that's fleshing out a few dollars where I have it to make sure that they have groceries or the rent is paid. That is sometimes me being quiet and stepping down or not taking an opportunity and giving it to them. Right. So I guess that would be my answer is identify where you have some privilege, because most of us have some in one way, shape, or form. And then figure out how you can advocate and increase someone else's material conditions or provide resources where you can. I think that's a good place to start.
Okay. Jasmine?
Yeah, I think that Blackness is a global epidemic and has been for many years, forever.
Yeah.
And so within your communities, you know, there are folks who are anti-Black. And this is an opportunity then for you to also have conversations, you know, with your folks and say, hey, you know, when you are talking about Black folks, disrupt those conversations at dinner, disrupt those comments. I think what Avery said is definitely on point in terms of resourcing folks and making sure that people are at tables that are important and are meaningful. Because one thing that I know is that if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. And we definitely have been served as Black folks on the menu since we were forcibly brought to this country. So there's an opportunity here for you to say, wow, what can I do to make sure that these people are at the table and not on the menu and not having to go back and clean up a mess that we did not create for ourselves?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. You know, throughout this series between the Cleveland Public Library and 19 News, whenever we've had one of our monthly discussions, I've always liked to ask of our panelists, and for the people watching across the country, what does allyship look like? What more can people do to be supportive, to be allyships? You know, in February when we covered vaccination in minority communities, Reverend R.A. Vernon and Dr. Charles Motlin said, be vaccinated, be proud, find facts, and be active. We spoke about Asian hate, something that's very intimate with me. I said, find out about Asianness, visit Asiatown, explore, you know, be curious, and it's okay to be curious. Racial allyship, we talked about the 21-day social justice and racial justice challenge. What do people need to do to be allies of the LGBTQ plus communities besides, you know, putting up a rainbow flag during Pride Month? How can we be effective allies?
I want to go back to language again, because I think it's important to redefine what we think of allyship, or how it's been presented as less. It's more ideological than it's not, right? Being an ally is, I'm not racist, or I'm not homophobic, I'm not transphobic, so I'm an ally. Good for you, that's cute, but it's not enough, right? Being an ally is, again, using your privilege, using your power wherever you have it to advocate, flesh out material, give out resources where you can, and increase someone else's material conditions. Again, a lot of that is a lot of helpful ways is in your pocket. You know, as much as I hate it, we live in a capitalist society and people got bills to pay and things to do, and they need money for that, right? A great way to be an ally is to start handing out some reparations to some people, right? Again, we talk about reparations on a very large scale and it's very political, but it's something that can happen on a very small scale and personally, right? If you have a little bit of coin and someone needs some, give it to them, right? If you see a college kid that needs some books for class and they can't afford it, buy them their books so they can get to school, right? I was on a panel a few weeks ago, and a healthcare practitioner said that she was kind of pen pals with someone who was suicidal, and they didn't really have support or resources where they were. So she and her partner drove to this person to make sure they were good and got the resource for them, right? That is what allyship is to me. And I think that's what it's going to have to be for the vast majority of us, for allyship to be substantial in any way, right? There's less of, book clubs on white fragility, and there's more of real material conditions being met.
Yeah. Jasmine?
I in my consulting practice and with folks that I coach, I really focus on relationships before work. And so I am very curious about how relationships are being established, and whether or not folks who are seeking to be allies have a yearning to build relationship, and not in a way where it's like, well, you're my one gay Black friend. I'm so like, you're the one I can point to, but a relationship in that I've been to your home. I've met your family. You've met my family. And what is the appetite for Black LGBTQ folks to actually invite, because, when we think about trauma, that is definitely tied to why we actually even need allies. We wouldn't need allies if we were interconnected and we're actually working together to build whole and just communities. So allyship is really fraught for me, actually. I think that people believe that they can give one time, or they can make a statement on Facebook or some other social media, and they can get people high-fiving them and clapping them out for things. And that actually doesn't impress me. I want to know what you do when no one is watching.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is what I want to know. I am less interested in what you're doing to showcase how amazing you are as an ally, and more about what do you do in private and anonymously.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that.
Let me ask then the next step. What if someone doesn't know what to do?
Okay.
What would you recommend? I mean, I know you said about learning about people, but what more? What more can people in Cleveland do to really make a difference?
There's so many resources.
Jasmine, I think you said it, but ask.
The LGBTs, Greater Cleveland LGBTQ Center that, Phyllis Seven Harris has really, she raised so much money to build this huge, beautiful center where we can come and be with each other and learn about community and be in community with each other. I'm not saying that I want to be your best gay, your best Black lesbian friend. I'm not saying that at all. You can follow me on various social media, and maybe we can connect in that way. But I do believe that the resources are there, and people they want someone to just kind of place it in their hand and not necessarily do the work of kind of what is the best next step for them. Because the best next step for someone may not be going to the LGBT center. It may be reading a book. It may be exploring the history of their families and understanding where LGBTQ folks have existed in their families, because we have been in our families since the beginning of time. We're just now more open, and more people are more receptive. And I can't say that that's always been the case, and it's still not always the case that families are receptive. So, we still have, we're 52 years after Stonewall at this point, and we are still dealing with folks who are struggling in their families around acceptance. So, start with your families first, make that your testimony, and then go out into the community.
Yeah, I love that. As we're having this conversation, the term that was coming back to me was ally fatigue. I don't know if y'all heard about this, but at the end of last summer, self-proclaimed allies were saying, "Oh, I'm so tired of doing the right thing," right? Or I'm so tired of being aware of all the hardships y'all been telling us about for centuries and centuries, right? The knowledge is too much; is wearing on me, right? And to me, like, that one, it just doesn't make any sense. But if you're looking to be an actual ally and to step in where you can, I would say ask some people that you may know or follow on social media. Ask organizations like Black Spring Cleveland or the Community Care Collective. Ask those people what they need. How can I help? Do you need money? Do you need volunteers? Do you need resources? Do y'all need food for this event? Something like that. Trust me, we will tell you what we need. Sometimes you don't even have to ask. We'll just tell you. But if you ask, there are plenty of opportunities to fit in wherever. And again, I'm focusing on like resources and money, but it's not all about that either. One of the great things that came out of the protests from last summer, where you saw white people use their bodies to protect Black and brown people against police brutality, right? That is a major way you can be an ally, right? If you see a protest going on, or even if you see someone of color, particularly a Black person, being pulled over, you know, use your privilege, get in between them, ask the officer what's going on, right? You stepping in can make the world of difference for that interaction between that Black person and that officer, right? Even if you don't say anything, you put your phone out and you record it to make sure that person gets off okay. That's a great way for some allyship. You don't even have to talk to the person. You can just be present. Like white people, in just being present in their bodies, in their whiteness, in the right spaces, doing it the right way, hear me good, doing it the right way, can make the world of difference when it comes to interactions with police, with prisons, with prosecutors, with judges. Even sometimes just at work. You got a Black person having a hard time with the supervisor, you stepping in and outside of that person, you stepping in and talking to that director or that superior, and advocating on behalf of this person having a hard time can make the world a difference. That's allyship that person never has to know about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how you both talk about large cultural issues broken down into singular interactions every single day of our lives. And it's not unique to this conversation. It, in fact, has been in every single conversation we've had in this series, spotlighting racial injustice, inequity in our country and our community, in so much as there is a lack of awareness, which has, I don't know if it's morphed or has led to a lack of compassion and understanding, and being focused, being aware, being conscious of ourselves, no matter who we are and where we are in this community, and reaching out and understanding one another, looking into each other's eyes, and not at the color of our skin or what we choose to wear, is the key to unlocking a better future for all of us. This has been a fascinating conversation. I thank you both so much for your insight, for your wisdom, for your candor. Avery, to me, you look like a rock star. I don't know if I'd be cool enough to hang out with you. So I don't know how anyone could have a problem with you walking down the street or giving you a.
Thank you,
and Jasmine, thank you so much. Avery, if people want to find out more about you, if they want you on panels, if they want to read your writing, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website, everywhere.org. It's just my name, .org. You follow me on Twitter, at Avery London _. That is my first and my middle name with the underscore. You hit me up by email, hello@everywhere.org, or on Facebook, Avery London Ware.
Fantastic. And Jasmine, what can people read from your work? Where can they find you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. So I am featured in an anthology called Sweeter Voices Still. And it's an LGBTQ anthology for Middle America, published by Local Belt Press. I have a story in here about my great Aunt Betty, who was a Black lesbian woman in Dayton, Ohio. And she had an after-hour spot for Black lesbian women from the 1950s to the early 80s in her basement, so that we could be safe and enjoy each other. So that story, A Tale of Three Seasons, is in my book. So I really feel connected to a deep lineage and legacy of Black lesbian feminism. And so you can find me at Black Feminist, and it's spelled a little funky, which is BLKFEMINST.com. You can find that's my website. And you can also find me on Twitter, Black Feminist, as well as Instagram, Black Feminist. And I also am an herbalist. So, I provide herbal medicine to folks. So you'll see me around in Cleveland providing medicine and really good vibes for folks who are interested.
Absolutely. I cannot wait to read that. Thank you again, both, so much for this just delightful conversation as we continue. It's not just Pride Month. It's not just Pride Year. It's every single day as we build a better America and a better Cleveland, one interaction at a time. For Avery, for Jasmine, and behalf of everyone at the Cleveland Public Library and 19 News, I'm Chris Tanaka. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.